Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness, his body ravaged by the pre-transplant conditioning that had destroyed his immune system. The room's clock read 9:47 am. Sarah was 3 hours late for the donation procedure. His phone showed no messages, just the mocking glow of their last text exchange. "Sleep tight, my love. Tomorrow changes everything." She'd been right about that. The door creaked open, and Emma rushed in, her face flushed. "Dr. Mitchell, I found something." She clutched a hospital tablet to her chest, looking over her shoulder before approaching his bed. "I was reviewing security footage for the pharmacy inventory audit, and..." A violent coughing fit interrupted her. Thomas's body shook, his compromised immune system leaving him desperately vulnerable. Emma quickly grabbed an oxygen mask, helping him steady his breathing before continuing. 3 nights ago, Sarah and James Cooper accessed the pharmacy's restricted storage unit. "Look." She turned the tablet toward him, showing grainy footage of 2 figures using an administrator's keycard. "They spent 40 minutes in there, but the inventory logs show no official access." Thomas watched the timestamp tick by in the footage. The figures emerged carrying nothing visible, but he noticed Sarah adjusting her designer handbag. "The trial drugs," he wheezed through the mask. "They're tampering with the..." The tablet suddenly went dark. Emma frantically tapped the screen. "It's dead. The whole system's locked me out." Her eyes widened. "Someone knows I accessed the footage." As if on cue, Thomas's phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. "Curiosity killed the cat, Dr. Mitchell. Focus on getting well, if you can." Emma's face hardened with determination. "They can't intimidate us. I've got copies of everything on a secure drive, and..." She stopped abruptly, a realization dawning. "I have to go. Now." Before Thomas could respond, she vanished. Hours stretched by with no word. His condition deteriorated as the doctors scrambled to find another donor match. The chances were astronomically low. Then 3 days later, a nurse brought unexpected news. "An anonymous donor has been cleared. Perfect HLA match." She smiled. "It's a miracle." Thomas knew better than to believe in miracles anymore. When the recovery room door opened post-transplant, he wasn't surprised to see Emma in a hospital gown, an IV line still taped to her arm. "You didn't think I'd let them win, did you?" she said softly, sinking into the chair beside his bed. "I had myself tested the day I saw the security footage. Called in every favor I had to fast-track the results." "Why?" Thomas's voice was barely a whisper. Emma pulled out a worn photograph. "My sister. She died in a Cooper Pharmaceuticals trial last year. The miracle drug that was supposed to save her." She took a shaky breath. "I've been gathering evidence ever since. But I needed someone on the inside, someone with the medical expertise to prove what they're doing." Thomas stared at the ceiling, feeling the healthy donor cells from Emma coursing through his veins, giving him a second chance at life and justice. "When you're stronger," Emma said, her voice taking on a steel edge, "we're going to make them pay. All of them." For the first time since Sarah's betrayal, Thomas felt a spark of hope, not just for survival, but for redemption. 3 months after the transplant, Thomas sat in his study, surrounded by walls of evidence, string-connected photos, documents, and sticky notes in an intricate web of deceit. His strength had returned, but the fire in his eyes burned hotter than ever. Another whistleblower came forward, Emma announced, entering with 2 coffee cups. She'd been reinstated to her position after a suspicious 2-week suspension. Janet Morris, former quality control specialist at Cooper Pharmaceuticals, says she has proof they've been diluting the trial medications. Thomas pinned Janet's photo to the wall. "That makes 13 witnesses, all with pieces of the puzzle." He sipped the coffee, grimacing at its hospital-grade quality. Some habits died hard. His phone buzzed. A secure message from Marcus, a pharmaceutical account manager who discovered irregularities in Cooper's books. "Wire transfers to the Cayman Islands stopped last week. They're moving money somewhere new." "They're getting nervous," Emma observed, studying the evidence wall. "Look at the pattern. Every time we get close to something concrete, they shift operations." Thomas stepped back, seeing the bigger picture. Notes from nurses about missing inventory. Testimonies from patients whose conditions mysteriously worsened after showing improvement. Bank statements showing millions flowing through shell companies. And at the center of it all, a photo of Sarah and James at a charity gala, their smiles now seeming more predatory than charming. Dr. Mitchell? A quiet voice came from the doorway. Lisa Chen, a young oncology resident, stood nervously clutching a file. Remember that patient you asked about? The one with the unusual reaction to CX 237. She glanced over her shoulder before continuing. I found something in his tissue samples. The drug concentration. It's barely therapeutic. Someone's been tampering with the hospital supply. Thomas's hands clenched. They weren't just stealing money. They were actively harming patients. His patients. There's more, Lisa whispered. I overheard Dr. Reynolds talking to someone on the phone about you. Said you were asking too many questions. That you needed to be handled. Emma's face paled. Reynolds. But he's on the hospital board. The corruption goes deeper than we thought, Thomas said, adding Reynolds' name to the wall. How many others are involved? His computer chimed. An email from Sarah's old assistant. Found deleted correspondence. Emergency board meeting called. Subject: clinical trial audit resolution. They're moving to cover their tracks, Emma realized. Thomas studied the evidence wall. Years of medical training, helping him see the symptoms of a disease much darker than cancer. But before he could respond, all the lights went out. In the sudden darkness, his phone lit up with a message. You should have died quietly, Thomas. Now others will have to suffer for your curiosity. When the lights came back on 30 seconds later, Lisa was gone. And with her, the damning tissue sample evidence. The hospital chapel sat empty at midnight, its stained glass windows dark. Thomas knelt in a pew, head bowed as if in prayer. But his eyes were fixed on his phone screen. The fake obituary was perfect. Renowned surgeon Dr. Thomas Mitchell succumbs to leukemia complications. It's done, Emma whispered, sliding into the pew behind him. The story's being picked up by local news sites. Sarah just texted 3 of her contacts about it. Thomas nodded, his face illuminated by candlelight. Now we wait. They didn't wait long. Within an hour, the chapel door creaked open. Footsteps echoed on marble floors, not the quiet shuffle of someone seeking solace, but the purposeful stride of business. The Lord works in mysterious ways, came a familiar voice. Father Michael, the hospital's beloved chaplain, approached the altar. Though some mysteries are better left unexplored. Thomas remained still, hidden in shadow. Emma's sharp intake of breath was the only sound as Father Michael made a phone call. It's confirmed, Mitchell's dead. The priest's voice carried clearly in the empty chapel. Yes, Sarah, I'm certain. I saw the body myself. A pause. The investigation dies with him. All that evidence he claimed to have? Gone. Just like him. Thomas's finger pressed record on his phone, capturing every word. The children's ward funding. Yes, once the new trial contracts are signed. Father Michael's voice hardened. I've kept my end of the bargain. 23 patients' records altered, every suspicious death marked as natural causes. Your tracks are covered. Emma's hand found Thomas's in the darkness, squeezing tight. Years of trust shattered. The chaplain who comforted dying patients had been enabling their killers. The board meets tomorrow to approve the new drug trials. Everything proceeds as. Father Michael stopped abruptly. Who's there? The chapel doors burst open. FBI agents swarmed in, led by Agent Rivera, who'd been building the case for months. Father Michael O'Connor, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, evidence tampering, and accessory to medical negligence resulting in death. Thomas stood, emerging from the shadows. Father Michael's face went ashen. But, you're dead. Sorry to disappoint. Thomas approached his former confidant. Tell me, Father, how many pieces of silver did it take? How many children had to suffer while you played both sides? The chaplain's shoulders sagged. The children's ward needed funding. Sarah promised millions. I thought I was helping. By helping them kill patients. Emma's voice cracked with anger. By covering up their crimes. Agent Rivera led the handcuffed chaplain away, but not before he turned to Thomas. Sarah knows. She always knows. You've just signed your real death warrant. Thomas watched as his last trusted childhood friend was led away in handcuffs. No, father. I've just ensured that the truth can't be buried anymore. His phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. You want to play dead? I'll make it permanent. Emma gripped his arm. What now? Thomas smiled grimly. Now, we spring the final trap. Thomas sat in the sterile examination room of Dr. Y's office, absently rubbing his thumb over the bruise in his inner elbow where they'd drawn blood 2 days ago. The routine physical had been Sarah's idea. You worked too hard, darling. Please get checked out for me. The irony of her concern wasn't lost on him now. The door opened, and Dr. Y entered holding a tablet, her usually warm expression replaced by professional neutrality. Thomas's physician instincts kicked in immediately. He knew that look. He'd worn it himself countless times before delivering bad news. The blood work shows some concerning abnormalities, she began, pulling up a chair. Your white blood cell count is significantly elevated, and we're seeing blast cells in your peripheral blood. Thomas's medical training translated the jargon instantly. Leukemia. His mind raced through survival rates, treatment protocols, and clinical trials, even as Dr. Wee continued speaking. But it was the 5-year survival statistics that kept flashing in his thoughts. 40%. I'd like to refer you to Dr. Patel at Dana-Farber, she was saying. He's the best hematologist-oncologist in Boston. Thomas nodded mechanically, accepting the referral paperwork. I should research treatment options, he heard himself say. Back home, Thomas headed straight for his study. Sarah was at a sales conference, her third this month. He opened his laptop, but instead of medical journals, he found himself typing James Cooper Pharmaceutical CEO into the search bar. The results loaded: distinguished silver-haired executive, numerous industry awards, recent devotee. The man had everything, except, apparently, ethics about sleeping with his employees. A notification pinged. Sarah had left her iPad signed into their shared cloud account. Thomas hesitated only a moment before clicking. Their marriage vows felt like ash in his mouth now anyway. The Maldives confirmation email was right there in her inbox. Dear Ms. Mitchell and Mr. Cooper, thank you for booking our romantic overwater villa package. The dates aligned perfectly with his proposed treatment schedule. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Conference running late. Don't wait up. Thomas's hands shook as he opened another email thread. The subject line read, Test results. Confidential. His medical expertise let him understand immediately. Sarah had secretly gotten tested as a bone marrow donor. She was a match, a perfect match. The timestamp hit him like a physical blow. She'd known for weeks during which she'd been planning her escape with James. The room spun as 2 realizations struck simultaneously. His wife was his best chance at survival, and she was actively planning to abandon him to death. His laptop chimed again, an incoming email from Dr. Patel's office confirming tomorrow's consultation. As Thomas stared at the screen, a new kind of resolve crystallized within him. Sarah thought she was orchestrating his end. Instead, she'd just given him something powerful, nothing left to lose. He picked up his phone and dialed Dr. Patel's office. Yes, I'd like to bring my wife to tomorrow's appointment, he said smoothly. She's eager to be involved in my treatment plan. Let her play her game. He'd play his. The steady beep of heart monitors filled Operating Room 3 at Massachusetts General Hospital as Dr. Thomas Mitchell prepared for the most critical moment of the triple bypass surgery. His reputation for steady hands and laser focus had earned him the nickname Iceman among the surgical staff. Today was no different, until his phone vibrated in his pocket. Standard protocol dictated that personal phones should be left in lockers. But after Sarah's recent complaints of recurring migraines, Thomas had taken to keeping his phone close, just in case. The thought of his wife's recent health concerns had him breaking his own rules. Dr. Mitchell, VP's holding steadied at 110/70. The anesthesiologist reported as Thomas's fingers danced expertly around the patient's exposed heart. The phone buzzed again and again. 3 calls in rapid succession. their emergency signal. Thomas's chest tightened. "Jennifer, take over monitoring the bypass machine," he instructed his assistant. "I need to take this call. It might be about my wife." Stepping back from the table but maintaining sterility, Thomas nodded to a nurse who answered the phone and held it to his ear. The familiar picture of Sarah's smiling face lit up the screen, her golden hair catching sunlight, green eyes sparkling with mischief from their anniversary dinner last month. But it wasn't Sarah's voice he heard. Heavy breathing filled the line, followed by a deep masculine chuckle. "God, I love when you wear that red lingerie set," a man's voice purred, a rustling sound. Then Sarah's breathless reply, "I love you too, James, but I should go. He'll be out of surgery soon." The line went dead. Thomas stood frozen, the world tilting on its axis as the implications crashed through his mind. Sarah, his Sarah. The woman who left inspirational sticky notes on his bathroom mirror, who surprised him with coffee during long shifts, who talked about starting a family over Sunday brunches. "Dr. Mitchell?" Jennifer's voice snapped him back. "The patient." Thomas blinked, forcing himself to focus on the exposed heart before him. A life literally rested in his hands. His personal life might be imploding, but he'd taken an oath. Years of training kicked in as he pushed everything else aside. BP's dropping. The anesthesiologist called out. "I see it," Thomas responded, his voice steady despite the tremor in his soul. "Increasing flow rate by 20%. Jennifer, clamp ready." For the next 2 hours, Thomas worked with mechanical precision, his mind split between saving his patient and replaying that phone call. Each suture was perfect, each decision calculated, even as questions stormed through his thoughts. Who was James? How long had this been going on? Had their entire marriage been a lie? The surgery was a success. The patient would live to see another day. But as Thomas scrubbed out, staring at his reflection in the surgical room window, he wondered if his marriage was as dead as he felt inside. Walking to his office later, Thomas checked his phone. One message from Sarah. "Made your favorite tonight? Beef bourguignon. Can't wait to hear about your day." He stared at the heart emoji until his vision blurred. Iceman indeed, he felt frozen to his core, but for entirely different reasons now. Something inside him hardened as he typed out his reply. "See you soon, sweetheart." The game was on, and Thomas Mitchell intended to play it very, very carefully. The federal courthouse buzzed with tension on day 15 of the Cooper Pharmaceuticals trial. Sarah sat at the defense table, elegant in channel, her mask of confidence only slightly cracked. James Cooper's silver hair had lost its luster during his weeks in custody, but his arrogance remained intact. "The prosecution calls its final witness," announced District Attorney Martinez. The courtroom doors opened, and Sarah's perfectly maintained composure shattered. Thomas Mitchell walked in, very much alive. Sarah's manicured hands gripped the table until her knuckles went white. James Cooper's face drained of color. In the gallery, Emma allowed herself a small smile. "Please state your name for the record," Martinez requested. "Dr. Thomas Mitchell, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at Massachusetts General Hospital." His voice carried clearly through the stunned silence. "And your relationship to the defendants?" Thomas's eyes locked with Sarah's. "Sarah Mitchell is my wife, though she left me for dead while embezzling millions from cancer patients." What followed was 2 hours of devastating testimony. Thomas methodically laid out the evidence: falsified trial data, diluted medications, offshore accounts, and the elaborate scheme to eliminate him when he got too close to the truth. The tissue samples revealed drug concentrations at 1/10 the reported levels, Thomas explained, displaying chemical analysis reports. Patients believed they were receiving life-saving treatment. Instead, they were being given barely therapeutic doses, while Cooper Pharmaceuticals pocketed the difference in costs. Sarah's lawyer attempted to object, but the evidence was ironclad. Emma's meticulous documentation, combined with Father Michael's confession and testimonies from other whistleblowers, formed an impenetrable wall of truth. And this final document, Thomas said, pulling out a familiar email, is the confirmation of my wife's planned escape to the Maldives. scheduled for the day she was supposed to donate bone marrow to save my life. Sarah finally broke. You were dying anyway, she screamed, jumping up. We had a chance to build something bigger. All those years watching you play savior in the operating room, while I had the chance to revolutionize the industry. Order. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. Revolutionize. Thomas's voice was quiet but cutting. You gave false hope to dying children. You watched patients suffer while counting your profits. That's not revolution, Sarah. That's murder. The jury took only 3 hours to reach their verdict. Guilty on all counts. Sarah and James faced decades in federal prison, that empire of lies dismantled. Outside the courthouse, Emma touched the scar on her arm where they'd harvested her bone marrow. Was it worth it? She asked softly. Thomas watched his wife being led away in handcuffs, her designer suit exchanged for prison orange. Justice always is, he replied. Then, turning to Emma, ready to get back to saving lives the right way? She smiled, and together they walked down the courthouse steps into the bright morning light. Behind them, reporters clamored for statements, but Thomas didn't look back. The truth had finally set him free. In his pocket, he carried a letter from the hospital board, reinstatement as chief of surgery, with a new additional role, heading up a dedicated unit for medical ethics and clinical trial oversight. Sometimes, he realized, you had to die to your old life to build a better one. The transplant unit's lights cast a harsh glow over Dr. Patel's face as he delivered the news. The International Donor Registry came up empty, he said, his expression grave. Given your rare HLA markers, Sarah remains your only viable match within the critical timeframe. Thomas leaned back against his hospital pillows, the irony bitter in his throat. His wife, the woman plotting his demise, was also his only hope for survival. He caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window, ghostly pale, dark circles beneath his eyes, cheekbones sharp from weight loss, the perfect picture of a dying man. I'll do it, of course, Sarah said, gripping his hand. Her wedding ring felt cold against his skin. Anything for you, darling. Her performance was flawless. The devoted wife, ready to sacrifice for her ailing husband. If Thomas hadn't seen the evidence of her betrayal, he might have believed the tears in her eyes. Later that evening, Emma slipped into his room during her rounds. Dr. Mitchell, there's something you need to see. She pulled up the transplant unit's database on her tablet. Sarah's been accessing the system, researching donor rejection rates and post-transplant complications. Thomas scanned the search history. She's looking for ways to make the transplant fail without appearing suspicious, he realized. His heart monitor beat faster. There's more, Emma whispered. I overheard her on the phone in the stairwell. She's booked a private flight to the Cayman Islands for tomorrow night, after the pre-donation procedures, but before the actual transplant. The pieces clicked into place. Sarah would appear to cooperate, undergo the preliminary testing, then vanish, leaving Thomas too weak from pre-transplant conditioning to survive long enough to find another donor. The door opened, and Sarah waltzed in carrying a thermal bag. I brought your favorite, that Vietnamese pho from the place near our first apartment. Her smile was radiant. The nurse said you needed to eat something substantial before tomorrow's prep begins. Thomas watched her unpack the food, her movements graceful and practiced. She'd packed chopsticks, extra herbs, even the chili sauce he loved. Such attention to detail, even in betrayal. You've thought of everything, haven't you? He said quietly. Always do, honey. She kissed his forehead. Now eat up. You need your strength. Thomas took a spoonful of soup, the familiar flavors flooding his mouth. How many meals had they shared like this? How many moments had been real? I love you, Sarah said, squeezing his hand. Try to rest. I'll be here first thing tomorrow for the procedures. He nodded, feeling the warmth of the soup spread through him as she left. Only Emma noticed his hand trembling as he set down the spoon. Should I call security? She whispered once Sarah was gone. No, Thomas replied, staring at the door. Let her think she's won. Sometimes you have to let the enemy believe they've succeeded to expose their true nature. But as the night deepened and his pre-transplant medication dripped steadily into his veins, Thomas wondered if he just gambled his last chance at survival on a dangerous game of cat and mouse. The chemotherapy dripped steadily through Thomas's IV as he reviewed clinical trial data on his tablet. 3 rounds of treatment had left him physically drained but mentally sharp, perhaps too sharp. As an experienced medical researcher, something about Cooper Pharmaceuticals' new leukemia drug trials kept nagging at him. "These response rates are statistically impossible," he muttered, zooming in on a graph. The nurse adjusting his medication glanced over with concern, probably attributing his words to chemo brain. But Thomas's mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. Every cancer trial had outliers, patients who didn't respond, unexpected complications, varying survival rates. Yet Cooper Pharmaceuticals' new wonder drug, CLX-237, showed nearly perfect results across all test groups. It was like looking at a medical student's ideal textbook case rather than real-world data. Thomas opened another file, this one obtained through his hospital's research partnership with Cooper Pharmaceuticals. Sarah's signature appeared at the bottom of dozens of trial verification forms. His wife, the dedicated pharmaceutical sales rep, signing off on miracle results. Dr. Mitchell, a young lab technician, Emma Chen, knocked on his treatment room door. "I have those historical trial records you requested." Emma had been helping him quietly gather data, believing he was working on a research paper during his treatment. She didn't know she was helping him uncover something far darker. "Look at these molecular structure analyses," Thomas said, pointing to his screen. "This showing CLX-237 has a 98% binding rate to cancer cells. That's practically impossible with this delivery mechanism." Emma frowned. Unless the data's been manipulated," Thomas finished. "And look who signed off on all the verification protocols." His finger traced a pattern through the documents. Sarah Mitchell, Regional Verification Officer. James Cooper, CEO. Sarah Mitchell. James Cooper. Their signatures danced together through pages of falsified hope. Thomas pulled up the company's financial reports. The numbers were staggering. Cooper Pharmaceuticals stock had tripled since announcing CLX-237's trial results. Investment money poured in. Hope sold well. His laptop pinged. An email from a dummy account he'd created. The offshore account he'd discovered in Sarah's name had received another deposit. 7 figures. Blood money. "Oh God," Emma whispered, seeing the numbers. "How many patients?" "Thousands," Thomas said grimly. "Every major hospital is fast-tracking CLX-237 based on these trials, including ours." His hand shook as he reached for his water cup, knocking it over. Emma rushed to help, accidentally pulling his tablet cord. The screen flickered, then went black. "I'm so sorry," she exclaimed. "It's fine," Thomas said, trying to restart the device. "Nothing. I saved the files." But when he checked his backup drive later that night, every document was corrupted, all evidence erased. In its place, a single text message from Sarah. "Get well soon, darling. Focus on your health. Leave work to those who can handle it." Thomas stared at his blank screen, the implications clear. They knew he was digging, and they had reached far beyond what he'd imagined. He needed a new plan, and he needed it fast.